Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we're stepping into the world of
The breath. Beneath Angkor's roots, something stirs beneath the silk cotton trees of Angkor Wat. Not wind, not the passage of pilgrims or the shuffle of tourists moving through galleries worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Something deeper. Something that began when the forest and the temple stopped being separate things and became, instead, a single breathing organism, part stone, part wood, part memory, crystallized in the space between root and ruin. It is said that the Khmer Empire built these monuments to bridge earth and heaven, to create in sandstone and laterite what existed in celestial realms, to translate the architecture of paradise into forms the monsoon could touch. For 600 years, from the 9th century until the 15th, the Khmer kings raised temples that defied the jungle's green hunger, that stood as permanent prayers in a landscape where everything else dissolved into humidity and heat. Angkor Wat itself, the largest religious structure ever built, rises like a stone mountain, its 5 towers arranged to mirror the peaks of Mount Meru, the cosmic axis around which Hindu and Buddhist cosmology turns. But the jungle remembers differently. Where scholars see abandonment, the forest sees invitation. Where historians mark the end of empire, the trees mark the beginning of a slower, quieter inhabitation. The silk cotton trees, Tetramelas nudiflora, they are called in the language of science, but names feel inadequate here, have grown not beside the temples, but through them, into them, around them. Their roots flow over galleries like water frozen mid-cascade, like rivers of wood that have learned to move in decades instead of seconds. They wrap around doorways where apsaras dance in frozen stone, their celestial smiles neither joyful nor sad, but caught in some liminal emotion we no longer have words to name. Look closely at these dancing figures, these divine nymphs carved by hands that understood beauty as a form of prayer. Thousands of them adorn Angkor's walls, no two exactly alike, each one unique in gesture and ornament, in the tilt of a head or the curve of a finger. They wear elaborate headdresses and jewels that stone somehow renders delicate. They dance in bas-relief, in sandstone that has weathered 8 centuries of rain and sun, and the slow, patient fingers of roots that trace their outlines like blind scholars reading texts written in a language older than literacy. The apsaras have watched the forest come. They watched when the last king departed, when the last monks chanted sutras in corridors that would soon echo only with bird calls and the drip of water through stone. They watched when the decision was made, or perhaps when the decision made itself, to let the jungle return, to allow what had been carved from wilderness to be reclaimed by it. The scholars speak of reasons: shifting trade routes, the rise of Theravada Buddhism with its emphasis on austerity over architectural grandeur, warfare with neighboring Siam, the simple exhaustion of resources. But reasons feel thin here, inadequate to explain why a civilization capable of such magnificence would simply walk away. Some believe the water failed. Angkor was not merely a temple complex, but a hydraulic city, an urban civilization that understood water with an intimacy that bordered on the mystical. The Khmer engineers built reservoirs called barrays, vast rectangular lakes that held millions of gallons, that turned the Cambodian plain into a geometry of water and earth, canals and rice paddies, a landscape that was itself a kind of mandala, a sacred diagram written in irrigation and intention. The water management systems were so sophisticated they defied drought for centuries, channeling monsoon rains, creating multiple harvests, supporting a population that may have reached 1 million souls. Until they didn't. Recent research whispers of possibilities. that the intricate hydraulic network became too complex to maintain, that decades of drought-stressed systems designed for abundance, that the very sophistication that sustained Angkor became, in the end, its fragility. When one part failed, the whole began to unravel, canals silted, reservoirs cracked, the sacred geometry that bound earth to heaven, that translated cosmic order into water and stone, began to leak. Or perhaps, and this is only whispered, perhaps the people lost faith in the geometry itself. Perhaps they looked at the temples and saw not heaven's reflection, but humanity's presumption. Perhaps the burden of maintaining paradise became too heavy. Perhaps they understood something we are only now beginning to learn, that permanence itself is a kind of violence, that stone resists but also imprisons, that the jungle's green chaos might be closer to truth than any architecture, no matter how sublime. When the empire collapsed, when the last prayers echoed through empty corridors, the forest didn't conquer. It embraced. Tree roots and temple stones grew into a single breathing organism, neither alive nor dead, but suspended in eternal becoming. The trees chose the weakest points, cracks in foundations, gaps between stones, and entered gently, almost tenderly, sending roots like questions into spaces carved for gods. As the roots thickened, they didn't destroy so much as transform, lifting stones, rearranging walls, creating new architectures that no human hand designed. The trees became structural supports, holding up galleries that would otherwise have collapsed. The temple became trellis for the forest. And somewhere in this intertwining, in this slow marriage of mineral and vegetable, something new was born, not temple, not forest, but a hybrid that belongs equally to both kingdoms. Stand in Ta Prohm at dawn, where the silk cotton trees are most magnificent, where their roots cascade over walls like wooden waterfalls, and you will feel it, the breathing. The temple exhales cool air that smells of stone and earth and centuries. The trees inhale through leaves that filter tropical light into green gold shafts. Together they create a respiration, a rhythm that predates and outlasts any human presence, that continues whether witnessed or not. At dawn, when mist rises from the moat like the breath of sleeping giants, you can almost hear it. The distant sound of gongs, bronze on bronze, the deep reverberations that called monks to prayer and marked the hours of devotion, the rhythmic chanting of sutras, syllables in Pali and Sanskrit that shaped the air into something more than sound, something that approached incantation, that treated language as a technology for altering consciousness. The shuffle of bare feet on stone stairs, thousands of feet over hundreds of years, wearing paths that are still visible, still inviting ascent to towers that pierce the sky and offer, to those who climb, a view that encompasses both the geometric perfection of temple layout and the chaotic abundance of jungle reclamation. But these sounds exist now only in the space between hearing and imagining, in the liminal awareness that comes in the hour before full sunrise, when mist softens boundaries and the mind hasn't yet hardened into certainty. The trees hold these echoes in their rings, in the slow, patient wood that outlives empires. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, reveals histories invisible to casual sight. Each ring is a year, each variation in width, a record of rain or drought, abundance or scarcity. The silk cotton trees of Angkor are not the originals. Trees don't live 6 centuries. But they are descendants of descendants, continuations of the same genetic lines that first found purchase in temple cracks during the empire's decline. And in their cellular structure, in the very chemistry of their growth, They have absorbed something of what they embrace. Their roots have dissolved minerals from temple stones, incorporating sandstone into wood, making temple literally part of tree. What the forest knows, it keeps in verdant silence. Archaeologists excavate. Conservators debate whether to remove the trees or preserve them. Tourists photograph the spectacular union of root and ruin. But the essential mystery remains untouched. Why this particular collaboration? Why does the forest seem to honor rather than obliterate, to preserve even as it transforms? Why do the trees grow through temples but rarely topple them entirely, as if some unspoken agreement exists between root and foundation, some covenant older than any carved into stone steles or recorded in palm leaf manuscripts? Perhaps the Khmer builders knew. Perhaps they designed the temples not merely to endure but to transform, embedding in their architecture an acceptance of impermanence, a recognition that all forms, even those hewn from stone, are temporary arrangements of matter awaiting their next configuration. The Buddhist concept of anicca, of impermanence, threads through Angkor Wat's galleries. The Hindu cycle of creation and destruction breathes in its cosmological alignments. Did the builders, even as they carved paradise in stone, understand that true paradise cannot be permanent, cannot be possessed, can only be approached through the acceptance of change? Beneath the silence, where memory fades into something older than remembering, the temples and the trees continue their slow conversation. They speak in the language of pressure and resistance, of root finding cavity, of stone yielding by increments too small to measure in human lifetimes. They speak in the vocabulary of symbiosis and transformation, of what happens when two apparently incompatible things refuse to remain separate. The trees need the temples, their structures provide support, their stones retain moisture, their galleries create microclimates. The temples need the trees, their roots prevent total collapse, their canopies shield from sun and rain, their presence draws visitors who fund preservation. But beyond practicality lies something more difficult to articulate. A rightness, a completion. As if the temples were never finished until the forest came, as if what the Khmer carved in stone was only half the sentence, and the trees provide the punctuation, the pause, the space where meaning accumulates. In forgotten corners of the earth, where human ambition meets patient wilderness, where permanence and impermanence dance in stone and wood, mysteries accumulate like morning dew on ancient leaves. Angkor is such a place. It offers no clear answers, no definitive explanations for why empire fell, or what the forest intends. It offers only the slow breathing of roots through stone, only the continued dance of apsaras in galleries where silk cotton trees stand guard, only the quiet invitation to witness transformation that occurs too slowly for human eyes to perceive directly, but which, over decades and centuries, creates beauty, stranger and more profound than any single vision could design. Perhaps it was never meant to be preserved unchanged. Perhaps the temples are most themselves when half-claimed by jungle, when architecture and organism blur into something unprecedented, when the sacred geometry that once bound earth to heaven is rewritten by roots that know a different mathematics, a different sacred altogether, one that requires surrender, that embraces decay, that understands paradise not as a destination, but as a process, eternal becoming inscribed in the space where stone remembers being mountain and wood remembers being seed. The breath beneath Angkor's roots continues, patient and unhurried, outlasting questions, outlasting answers, offering only the quiet mystery of things reclaimed and, in that reclaiming, somehow perfected.